You are listening to AccessUW, a podcast series brought to you by the University of Washington Office of the ADA Coordinator, where we highlight insightful discussions, informative interviews, and valuable insights about accessibility, equity, and inclusion, all within the realm of higher education with experts across the UW. In terms of accessibility, each podcast and a transcript are made available at the Office of the ADA Coordinator's website at www.washington.edu/ADA. Well, welcome back to AccessUW. Today, we have two incredible professors with us in the Disability Studies program here today to talk to us about someone who's near and dear to my heart, as well as to the hearts of many in the Disability Studies program, Dennis Lang. Dennis was a disabled advocate and the founder of the Disability Studies program, and truly the program would not be here without him today. I have with me today Dr. Joanne Woiak and Dr. Sara Goering to talk a little bit more about Dennis as two amazing colleagues of his, as well as two incredible members of the Disability Studies program. Sara, Joanne, would you want to give a little brief introduction and maybe say your relation to the Disability Studies program for viewers?
Sure, I can start. I'm Sara Goering. I'm in the philosophy department as my home, and I'm a core faculty member for Disability Studies and got involved with it when I arrived in 2003, a long, long time ago.
I'm Joanne Woiak. I am currently Associate Teaching Professor for the Disability Studies program, technically through LSJ, Law, Societies, and Justice. That's a fancy term for I'm a full-time lecturer now. I've been the Associate Director of the program for a number of years as well. I got involved in the program when I first came to UW in 2001, 2002, and immediately met Dennis, and I started teaching for the program in 2006 and have not looked back.
Amazing. Both two incredible dedicated professors for this program. So speaking about your guys' start here at the University of Washington, when was the first time you met Dennis Lang and came across him at this university?
Yeah, this is Joanne. I'll start since I came here slightly before. We were super excited when Sara came, by the way, in 2003. I met him. So I came in 2001, moved to Seattle with my partner at the time. So I was teaching part-time, and I got a gig part-time with the history department. So I think it was in winter or spring of 2002. And I was teaching history of eugenics as a seminar for history. And there were 6 students, right? It was kind of awesome up here in Smith Hall. And at least 2 of them were disabled. And they both knew Dennis. And they said, Joanne, you have to meet Dennis. And I'm a historian of science and medicine. And I had come to UW, just to figure out what to do to get some new teaching gigs. So the history of eugenics stuff, I had done my dissertation. I had never used the word disability, right? I had no idea there was such a field, even though I was researching, right? The folks with disabilities. I had a lot of colleagues. I have a brother who's disabled. I've been sort of part of community in ways, but I didn't know there was a field. And my students in history of eugenics said, you're doing disability studies. Go meet Dennis. And, I don't specifically recollect it, but we certainly hit it off right away. And he and Sherry Brown, who was co-teaching the intro class at that time, which was called Disability and Society at that time, they invited me to start giving a guest lecture about history of eugenics and disability history. So for a few years there, I was just, popping into their intro class and giving a guest lecture, and got to be on that steering committee at some point. Yeah.
Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, for folks listening in, the Disability Studies program really started from focus groups that were developed by Dennis Lang, as well as Sherry Brown was one of the co-instructors as well, too, having some other incredible instructors coming in. But for a while, for almost 2 years, we were just one class and one focus group trying to get more development and more engagement in the program and this field of study as well, too. And Dennis was kind of this shining knight in armor who is pulling everyone in, not only students, but also faculty too across the campus. So, Sarah, when was the first time you met
Yeah,
Dennis?
can I just say a shout out to CHID, Comparative History of
Yeah.
Ideas?
Yeah.
That was where, as I understand it, the classes before I got there came here were started.
Mhm.
So I uh, discovered the Disability Studies Reader. I can't remember which volume, but it was probably the first one, given how long ago it was as a grad student. And I was teaching pieces out of there when I was
Wow.
teaching medical ethics courses, just recognizing, in my time in grad school, there was a lot of attention to the Human Genome Project and all the kinds of um, seeming new eugenic practices, old eugenic practices that were being put in play or considered. And I just could see in reading those things, there are lots of issues. And then I found the Disability Studies Reader and started, digging into that scholarship. So when I came and gave a job talk here in the winter of 2003 for the philosophy department, Dennis was in the audience. And my talk was about philosophy of disability. And he
Yeah.
came up right afterwards and introduced himself and said, I really hope you come. And if you come, you will be part of disability studies at UW. There was no, we would like to invite you. No, you will be part. And that was great. And then I did get lucky enough to get the job. And when I arrived in fall 2003, I think within the first month anyway of my time here, I'm still getting settled, figuring out where I am. Dennis came and welcomed me and said, I'd like you to go with me. We're going to go
Yeah.
ask for money for Diaz. To Susan Jeffords, who I think at the time was a vice provost or something.
Yeah.
And like that's an intimidating thing for a completely new faculty member. I don't know
Yeah.
anybody, but Dennis has this power of persuasion, right? And he just said, nope, you're coming, like we're gonna go, because a lot of the people who were doing the amazing work
Yeah.
of building disability studies were in more precarious
Yeah.
positions than I was, even though I was untenured, right? I was still in a tenure track line. And I so appreciate Dennis basically filled me in as we are going over to Jefford's office on how the courses had been funded and how they were basically funded quarter to quarter, and we had to beg every time to get the
Yeah.
money. And just said, all you need to do is say it's important, right? Just be with me and be in this, and we'll talk about what we want to do to build it. And that's just so, for my experience with Dennis, so paradigmatic of what he
Yeah.
does. Like he just brings people in and he helps you figure out your way, and then he builds a community
Mhm.
that can take action.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and he had a vision. I mean, you could see it right there.
Yeah.
He knew that we needed to solidify this. And I mean, we love you, Sarah, and we loved you when you arrived, but also the fact that you were a tenure track faculty and sort of the first in our community who was, as you say. And so he knew, right? He
Yep.
was going to grab you and get you up to date. And we
Yeah.
were gonna leverage that. And it worked, right? Because by whatever year it was, right, Toby, 2005 or so. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
Thank you. We actually had the minor installed. And then we could start to have our own course prefix and develop some more courses and get some more stable funding. And speaking of funding, and if we're segueing sort of towards the history of the program, it always has to be noted of all the labor Dennis did, he was never on the payroll. He was
Yes.
never paid. This was
Mhm.
completely volunteer. All of his energy, all of his love, all of his, finding ways to connect people. And it was, he was always reaching out all over campus. Who possibly is doing anything about disability? Have them come to the steering committee. Go sit down with them in their office for a little while. Give them a call. Always doing that. Never paid. And yes, but it set a legacy, right? That a lot of us were never paid for what we were doing. Sherry was not really paid, Sherry Brown, for a lot of the efforts. I was certainly not paid most of the time for the work we were doing, planning events and sitting on committees and doing other service. So yeah, yes, awesome. Also, whoops, it was an interesting way to start a program, completely unfunded in that way.
I mean, 100%, but the labor that everyone put in
Yeah,
has really made it worth it today, creating a program that
right.
not only has a major, a minor, and a graduate certificate that just continues to grow and grow every year, and new class proposals coming in every single year as well too, new affiliates joining the program as well too. But Joanne, you segged me into the history, so let's keep it there. You guys kept talking about Dennis really bringing in different faculty as well as students as well too across the campus to really focus on the development of disability studies. Could either of you speak on to the development of the disability studies program and kind of that committee that was formed in the early 2000s to create some of these core classes that we still have today?
A little bit back. So I know that, and Toby's been writing about this history. Just want to acknowledge that, and also that I've been dipping a little bit into to kind of get my dates straight, and so on. So yeah, definitely the shout out to Chid for providing the opportunity for those focus groups. So Dennis, started teaching disability studies because he and the students and the community members and the faculty members said, this campus is bleep, right? Ableist as hell. What are we going to do? Well, people need to be educated about that, right? People need to know that there's another way to do things. People need to know the social model of disability. So literally, they took an educational path to make material change, right, on this campus. And it was Dennis was teaching, and I know that Toby, you found the data that Christina Knoll, who was a PhD student in what was then called Women's Studies, was co-teaching it. I also want to give a shout out to another grad student who was in English and is now a big DS scholar. Amy Vidali was there early on. And there were also folks who aren't really in the record because they weren't necessarily enrolled as students at the time. There were community members, alums, Diane Martin and Hioni Karamanos were there from the start, right? Folks that we've kind of stayed in touch with, but aren't necessarily recognized as, they were giving guest lectures in the intro class, that sort of thing, and being there on the steering committee and sharing their experiences as disabled folks on this campus. So there was community members, there were students, there was the handful of faculty, Sherry Brown, of course, Kurt Johnson in rehab medicine early on, and then some of those deans and provosts who were always like in the background. We need to make sure that they know what we're doing and that they value what we're doing. So those focus
Joanne,
groups.
to cut you off really quick, I just want to make a point of how incredible it is. So much when we are in the academy and higher education, we think of very formal research as informing our education and our curriculum and our pedagogy. But it seems like what you guys are getting at is Dennis was one who leaned on community for their knowledge and their experience. So to even build up some type of academic program that was going to be studying disabled people, you would have to actually learn from them. And the way that he did that, from connecting faculty that was already pre-existing on campus to reaching out to additional community members to come and guest lecture, just want to emphasize how incredible that is. And also, sadly, a rarity that we see in higher education today. Sorry, Joanne, did not mean to cut you off, but I just think that's a powerful piece as well.
No, that is powerful. Yeah. I don't know, Toby, if you remember, when did the class actually become a funded class, right? The 332 disability and cited class. Yeah, you were talking about that actually. And then Sherry Brown was teaching the 433 class, and Kurt Johnson, and there was another of his colleagues named Pat Brown was teaching the 433 class.
She was in education too, right?
She was in education. Yeah. And Sherry was in law and education. She was doing the 434 class, right? So the curriculum also built from who was here, right? As we got that funding to do some buyouts that those folks could teach. But it did start as quite a policy and law focused curriculum, and it's grown from there. I mean, I'm happy when I came, they were inviting me to guest lecture about history and history of eugenics. So we did start the history of eugenics class. Toby, it was Chid. I think Chid might have funded that, and it was a Chid class for a few years, and then it got picked up by the bioethics and humanities department in School of Medicine, because I actually think Paul Stephen Miller did that when he came, right, about 2006 ish, right? And
Yeah.
he was our first formal director, and he forged some connections with the School of Medicine, the bioethics department, and Wiley Burke, who was a director down there, got very excited about bringing a critical disability lens into some of their work, and they supported the history of eugenics class. Yeah, from way
And
back then.
Paul Miller had been the director of the EEOC under the Clinton administration and came to I think to a name chair at the law school.
Yeah.
And, Dennis again talked with Paul and figured out they did a lot of workings to have Paul be the first,
It
first
was,
director.
I think the
yeah,
first formal director, right?
official formal director of
Yeah,
the
that's
Disability
what I'm
Studies
thinking.
program.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was amazing, right? And just
Right.
also brought a little more funding given the reputation that Paul had outside of this university too.
Yeah.
I just want to add to what Joanne already said. I think it's right that there's a kind of history, a contingent history that gives us a base in rehab medicine through Kurt Johnson and in education and law through Pat and Sherry
Yeah.
Brown, and then Paul Miller in the law school.
Yeah.
But, some of the grad students at the time, like Anjali Truitt was early on, and she
Right.
was in public health genetics. So I think one of the genius parts of what Dennis did is
Yeah.
pull people in from places that you might not expect to find somebody doing disability studies work and show them how this critical lens on things that other things that are going on in their areas
Yeah.
could be disability studies, and that they could take that back. Because I think, Christina was in what was women's studies then, Anjali in public health genetics.
Yeah. Amy in English. Remember, Amy was part of curriculum transformation in that first.
And
Remember Rebecca Corey? Yeah. She had done her PhD at Syracuse, and she was here actually working with Do It, I think, right? And developing a universal design work.
Yeah, so somewhere in there, Joanne was just getting to, we got money for a curriculum transformation project that paid faculty to look at a syllabus that they had for a course in any field and, figure it. This was our push to think of disability as diversity, push to see how they could include critical approaches to disability as part of whatever they were doing. And I can't remember all the people who came in, but we ran, I think it was 2 quarters long. They earned a little stipend. There was a lot of effort again by the people putting it on, including Dennis, that I think was pretty much unpaid.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, we did get a small stipend for participating, but remember, Dennis did the work of saying this is mostly a bunch of non-disabled faculty kind of learning about disability studies. And Dennis felt like he was the disabled person in the room, and he reached out to students, right, and got some stipends for them to be part of this, because we were very, again, as Toby was saying, very intentional that we're not going to develop this without the voices of disabled folks in the room. So Christina was part of it, and you remember, I think it was Susanna Martini was part of it, Sarah, and she was one of the people who was actually in that initial eugenics cohort I had. History of eugenics cohort I had. We were not doing eugenics; we were studying history. She was. Yeah, she was one of the people who kind of dragged me, not kicking and screaming, over to first meet Dennis. Yeah, and so she stayed with us. And we had, so in curriculum transformation, we had anthropology person. We had Jose Alanis, right, who's one of our core faculty, and became one of our directors in Slavic studies. And we had, there was somebody in communication there who's moved on. Jörg Koch was in there, right, from the dance program.
Yeah, that was
and he's since moved on. A lot of folks have moved on because it's UW. And I'm just going to give one mention of this and not go on. Robin DiAngelo in social work was in that group. The Robin DiAngelo. Yeah.
An incredible group of interdisciplinary scholars.
Right. Yeah. And then as you noted, Toby, we had a bunch of guests who came. And I don't think we had money to bring them, right? They were coming already, or maybe Sue Schweik was like, yeah, I'll come up and, chat with you all about intersectionality.
I don't know. Maybe we had small
Small
honoraria as
amount.
part of
Yeah.
that grant, but it wasn't much. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It was great.
But again,
But
just
that was a way both to get some disability into other people's syllabi, but bring in some faculty who might be interested. I think Dennis knew not everybody who came for that small stipend and doing this workshop would really become part of the disability studies community, but some of them did, right? And so it's just a way to build your base.
Yeah.
And especially the students that were on that as well too remained very steadfast and committed to the field of disability studies, both at the UW and even leaving the UW in their own respected fields. But again, just want to emphasize how incredible it was that Dennis relied also on the knowledge and expertise of students while building out this program, specifically disabled students, and really prioritizing their lived experience as well too, which I think is something very unique when we see of a development of a major. When are we actually having students help us write the curriculum and write where we want to see the pedagogy and the classes go and what we should be serving, which is incredible. And on the line of students and the involvement of students, could either of you speak on Dennis's interactions with disabled students as well too, in supporting their efforts, possibly through an example of Disability Advocacy Student Alliance that formed in the early 2005, or even the formation of the Disability and Deaf Cultural Center in, I believe, 2012?
Yeah, this is Joanne. There is a lot to say. I mean, and I'm going to throw in there also that I experienced watching Dennis do this labor of love and mentoring me and probably other people, where students would approach him all the time, right? He was the mentor. He was, stuff is messed up on this campus. I am having trouble with XYZ. We would say, go talk to Dennis. And so I learned how to be something of a mentor and a sounding board, and what the, offering resources and such to sort of students who are seeking that type of support, right? Because other faculty were not out as disabled. So I was learning from Dennis, and I do identify as non-disabled, but he would take me to meet with students, right? And sort of learn about what the issues were and about how to be a support part of the support network for that student or those students. So with the more formal stuff, the students who restarted the Student Disability Commission in 2006-07, Emerson Seekins, with support from other folks like Ashley Moog, who still is around Seattle doing disability studies, and Marissa Hackett, who was the Women's Commission person, and Monica Olson, right, Sarah? They were taking Intro to Disability Studies in 2006. I think that might have been the first year that it was a formal class under the 332, or one of the first years. Because I remember, it was before then, because I went to guest lecture a couple of years before then. But Dennis got the funding and got me to teach the class in 2006. And those folks were in that class. So what did Joanne learn? I was co-teaching with Dennis, right? He was mentoring me and being an instructor for disability studies, because obviously I had never done it before. No one does when they come into teaching disability studies. So I'm working side by side with him in the classroom, and we were developing, I think, a dynamic about the disabled, non-disabled sort of dynamic, and playing off of that. But those students were all there. So who was I learning disability studies from? That whole community of students. And then I came back, taught again in 2008, and Noah Seidel, who is now DD Ombuds, right, was in that class, and a bunch of other people. So I was always learning from students. And the class was filling up 3/4, right? We expanded it to being offered 3/4 by 2010. And so we made the argument to the university, let's make it a big class, so that we can sort of consolidate the instructor labor. And then we can bring in guess what? More students, graduate students as teaching assistants. And that started in 2011. I did the course design on that. We made it a big lecture. And again, I was learning step by step with the students who were in my class, or, they were teaching me. So it was Tosh Hanson Day, who then goes on to become like one of the first directors of the D Center, and Nia Stenson, who was, I think, actually the first director of the Disability Commission of the D Center. Sorry. And from them, I learned in 2011, 2012 about disability justice. And that was the moment, right? For me, that was a moment of, what does teaching mean, right? How do you actually do teaching where we're creating collective access because the university does not really make an accessible space? Where do you center the voices of multiply marginalized, BIPOC, queer, trans students? And it was those disabled students who were already embedded, who were already part of the disability justice movement in Seattle, that really made a huge difference for our curriculum, I think, through me and through other instructors at that point, like 2011, 2012. Oh, and I got to give a shout out. I mean, obviously, we're talking about the D Center. The person who did all of the paperwork, all of the on the ground work of organizing all the sources of funding, getting all of us to write letters to create a D Center, right? A Disability and Deaf Cultural Center. Ann Lutzow was our student. And she was, I think, after Barbara Greenberg, who we now have a scholarship named after, and Noah Seidel. I think Ann was the next person who got the major about 2012.
Yes, correct.
And she founded the D Center as her major capstone project. Can you imagine that? So it was, she got 1/4 of credit, and she was actually the SDC director at the time. So it was kind of sort of part of her labor there. But the amount of work she did to, just mobilize all that interest and all that support to actually get that founded. And the D Center came about at the same time that Committee on Disability Issues was advocating for a review of DRS, and Sue Kroger's report about DRS came out. And so it was all kind of hand in hand with a real fomenting of community and student and faculty and staff interest in making this campus more welcoming and more accessible to folks.
Yeah.
Joanne, did we start the Dennis Lang Award? Did Dennis semi-retire right around Ann Lutzow's time? Because I feel like she won. Did she win one of the first Lang Awards?
I think that's true. She might even have won 2 of them during her years, because we were kind of doing that as well. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. And I did write down the history of the Dennis Lang Award, so I got that somewhere, right, Toby? We can find that. Yeah, so Dennis must have been semi-retiring about 2010, 2011, right? Because I became the main instructor for the intro class then. Yeah,
I believe he retired right before the D Center opened, but came back when the D Center was opening, and was able to celebrate with everyone the creation of the second Disability Cultural Center in the US in higher education, and the first one that specifically includes deaf people as well too, in the actual name, as well as in just the space that we're creating as well too, which was an incredible call out.
And just to be clear, even when he retired and moved to Hawaii, he still came to our meetings and events by phone, because we didn't have Zoom then.
Yeah. He phoned into all the faculty meetings. I remember one where he couldn't make it, and he was like, "Joanne, can't you guys reschedule it?" And I was like, "No, we just got to do this, Dennis. Thank you for all your work. You've been our mentor, and we love you, and we're going to have this meeting." It was kind of heartbreaking, actually, that very moment, because he was still involved and still wanted to be involved. Yeah.
The other thing in the lovely history that you were just relaying, there was the student protest that Dennis helped with in front of the hub when the hub was being renovated.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something about that? Because I thought that was amazing too.
Yeah, I knew you and I were both here. When they were renovating the hub, the front entrance, it had they were going to put 2 or 3 steps 3 steps in the design of it.
For beauty.
Yes. Anybody read Jay Dolmage's Academic Ableism, Chapter 1? It's in my History of Eugenics class today. In fact, we're talking about the steps, the entrance, the beauty over the inclusion. Yeah, so there were going to be 3 steps. And I think that the DASA, the head of the leadership of DASA at that moment was Noah Seidel, right? Disabled wheelchair user. And Charity Ranger was still around, all the DASA folks, Emerson and Ashley. And they said, what are we going to do about this? And they got together with Dennis and they said, there's an event coming up where Bill Gates Sr. is going to be here for some sort of fundraising thing on campus at the hub or near the hub, whatever. Let's do a protest while Bill Gates Sr. is going to be here. And that word got out that these folks in wheelchairs were going to show up and throw themselves in front of the steps at the construction site. And like the next day, suddenly the hub leadership and the architect come back and go, oh, by the way, it would actually be less expensive if we got rid of the steps and didn't have this little elevator at the front entrance. So yeah, we'll just take that out of the design. La 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 la.
Literally,
so I don't think
they were going to have an elevator for 3 steps.
Yeah. Yeah. It would actually be cheaper if we don't do that. And by the way, please don't come and do a demonstration right here.
As the story goes, Dennis got a call at like 7 or 8 p.m. the night before basically being like, we will meet all of your demands. Please call off the students. So just the power of the students and the power of disabled movements on campuses is incredible, of actually reshaping our built environment and reshaping how we see our policies and practices for all. I know we talked a little bit about the Dennis Ling Scholarship, but I want to go into a little bit more of the future state as well, too, after Dennis's passing, of how does his legacy continue to still live on in the disability studies program today? I know there's a big, rich, and vibrant history that, of course, gets told, and of course, it goes in very many different ways, but I'd love to hear from both of you of how Dennis impacts his character, his demeanor still impacts either your work today or just the disability studies program as a whole.
A big question. I think the combination of scholarship and activism is part of what Dennis was all about. And I think that's what that award is trying to reward and acknowledge and recognize. And that is something that so many students and faculty are actively engaged in. And we just want to make sure that that's a central part of what the disability studies program does. I also think, right, if you think about the Hahn Award, which came in while Dennis was here and very, actively present on campus. And there were lots of conversations from that early steering committee about the best ways to use that money as well. It's a huge win for us, right? To have this amount of money brought in. And Dennis, I think, wanted to make sure that we would make disability studies something that would have a research component to it, that would make it scholarly as well as activist, that would, make it legible to other departments and other administrators around the campus. And so thought, let's direct the Hahn money toward more scholarly and research projects, or getting students and faculty out to conferences to, talk about the work that they're doing. So I think, to me, it's that balance that Dennis was both interested in academics and education and really interested in activism, and doing both at the same time and trying to hold the two together in an academic environment.
Yeah, he was the bridge for so many.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great point about the Harlan Hahn Endowment Awards. It was intended to be, funding for an endowed chair, basically, right? And it just didn't work out that way. The history of Harlan Hahn, he was a USC disabled political science professor, but apparently he had filed a lawsuit at USC around access, and so he didn't want to leave his legacy or his inheritance to USC. And I'm still not sure how he connected to UW, whether that was through Dennis or anything in particular. But the fact that Dennis said, let's not only support research, make sure it includes student research, but across the university, and that will bring more people to us, right? That will actually build our disability studies community, because we built into receiving a Harlan Hahn grant that you had to come back to the community and tell us about what you did. So we've tended to have like talks, right, and roundtables. We haven't done it that consistently during the pandemic, but just to make sure that we all stay in touch with each other and we learn more about our research, and we're bringing more folks in to do the research. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the pedagogy side, because I think for me, being literally in the classroom with Dennis for several years, and then being with him one-on-one, or when we would sometimes, we did social events, right, Sarah? We would go over to, what the heck is that hotel called now? It was the Decca. Now it's the Graduate.
Graduate.
And we'd go, I've been telling students, we go down in this dark basement bar, which was grim and not particularly clean, and definitely not cheap. It was very expensive.
Cool. It was cool.
It was cool, and it was relatively accessible. And we just all crashed this bar, once or twice a month, and people would just be like, lounging all over the chairs and flopping on the floor and doing all the great crip things that we do. It was really cool. Yeah. So we would just meet there, and then we when guest lecturers would come, we'd have informal get-togethers. And I just remember, like, obviously practicing relatively accessible, inclusive teaching with him, and then talking about it and sort of having my own epiphanies as I went along about my own ableist practices and approaches, and then learning from him and students about what it would actually mean to teach from the inspiration of disability justice principles, right, as the years went on for me.
I also think, thinking about all the volunteer work that Dennis did, not getting paid for things, but building the whole program. I'm just thinking about disability justice, that in the later years when he was still on campus, he was a staunch advocate for finding money to pay people coming to give guest lectures, right? So on the one hand, he did everything for free. On the other hand, he realized that was not a good practice going forward, not just for the general instructors, but even for people who are coming to collaborate on the courses, right? Coming in as guest lecturers. Yeah. So we wanted to write that.
I'm sitting here. I have framed framed over here in my office. So we have two offices down here in Smith Hall. Thanks to Dennis's long legacy, that I got this full-time teaching gig, right, which gave us some office space, and we still need to grow that. But I'm sitting here staring at the framed letter that we wrote to him, Sarah, and we all signed when we created the Dennis Lang Student Award. All the old timers, and the dean was there, right? Judy Howard was there, and Paul was there, and just that lovely moment. We were in that bar, right? We were in the Decca. We've got a few photographs left of that, and just how pleased he was. And he also said, "Oh my gosh, I haven't died yet." Right? And I always think about that. He's like, "Isn't that what you do after folks have passed?" And I am so glad that we had the opportunity to create that and to celebrate him, when he was still here to enjoy it and was still really active. And I'm staring at another picture of him where we got invited to go tour Husky Stadium before it opened, right? And to sort of give an overview of what we thought about the accessibility. And he and I were running around on the field, and I took this great picture of him, kind of between the goalposts, doing actually, he's not doing a W, he's doing a Hawaiian hang loose, hang five, since he was pretty Hawaiian at heart. And I always just think of him like, there's the activist. Let's make some change on this campus. Let's make sure that things can be accessible as possible. Let's have disabled people at the table, getting a foot in the door. And also, let's go have some goddamn fun while we're doing it, right? Like, we get to go to the stadium. Let's hang out. Let's run around the field. Let's go see how the athletes live. And he was a huge football fan. he and I talk football. He was such a good friend, right? He was definitely one of my best friends for all that time. And we just didn't talk about school. We talked about sports. We talked about football. Toby, I think that Dennis might be the first person that I kind of sort of came out to when I started seeing my parents' house. Because they're just like, hey, what do you think about this, Dennis? He's like, oh, she's great. That's great. Yeah. I mean, I needed his affirmation, right? He was kind of everything that I had really become. Disability studies had become everything to me, and being part of this disabled community had become everything to me. And I didn't know. I mean, until I met him, I had no idea that that's who I was and what I needed to be. And I wouldn't want to be anywhere else, right? I want to be with disabled and chronically ill people. I want to be with the people who are kicking ass and who have so many skills and so much knowledge, right? That all of us non-disabled people are now like taking from you all. And we need to recognize that and pay you all for what you're doing. So yeah, anyway, I'm so happy that I have this space and I get to kind of remember him. And
of course, yeah. And a theme that I feel like I've been hearing as well too is the radical joy that has also come with Dennis's legacy. I mean, again, for folks who aren't too familiar with disability studies, the academy in itself is inherently ableist, as Joanne was mentioning, academic ableism by Dolan earlier, of there's so many different barriers, not only in society as a whole, but also that people were facing as faculty or as students just trying to navigate higher education. But still, there were still so many moments of joy that you can see, from the creation of the D Center to just getting together as faculty in that bar that you guys were mentioning as well too. There were so many different moments of joy. And again, Dennis being an unpaid volunteer, still finding joy in so much, finding joy in community and connecting with disabled students and being a mentor and support for others. I think it's just really beautiful to see, and something that I think still lives on in the disability studies program today, is really instilling that joy and that sense of community through all the hardships that continue to happen and how the world is today.
Can I just add to, I think, on the radical joy point, I think there's so many times when Dennis did not get money, didn't get the thing needed, got pushed back, right? All those things. And somehow he stayed optimistic, right? That he could see that there would be ways that, that with the right people, with the right solidarity, with perseverance to keep pushing and trying different things, it was going to work. I think it's so easy to be very pessimistic and skeptical and frustrated. And no doubt he had moments of all of those, but to have the ability to hold on to the optimism, to see something. And I think, Dennis, looking at what the program is now, it's just amazing. Think about starting from CHID focus groups or little smaller student groups. It's, we have a DS faculty meeting now, and we have all these affiliates, we have core faculty, we fill up the Zoom screens, we're in so many different parts of campus. I think it's not to say that we couldn't use more money and that do more, right? But yeah, it's pretty amazing. And that's, I think, because he did not give up. He just kept pushing. He could see what we might be able to make.
Yeah. And he would be very pleased also that we've got more graduate student involvement than ever before. And I do want to give a shout out to Stephen Myers and Mark Harness, who did the groundwork to get a graduate certificate. Which, it can be an awesome thing to have a graduate certificate, but also just come and be part of our, monthly writing seminar. Come and take one of the classes. Come just get on our listserv, grad students. Come, because y'all are everywhere on this campus. I taught a foundation, the Critical Disability Studies Foundation class for grad students last fall, 20 people in that class. From all across the university, right? The grad students are doing the hard work, but they don't necessarily have folks they can talk to. about how hard this work is, how hard it is to bring a critical disability perspective into their fields. A lot of them are disabled grad students, of course, so we also have that community building going on. And yeah. Anyway, that I think Dennis would be just really happy to see that we sort of have more structured support for grad students, and it's expanding. And that means that we not only change the world, but we change the field. We change all those fields, right? Because all those folks, I'm going to X number of PhD defenses this spring, right, Sarah? There's a whole slew of people who've been taking our courses, who've been teaching critical disability studies, who are getting their PhDs and moving on to change the world and change their fields. The impact that we are having because of Dennis saying to Chid, can I just have a classroom and you put this on the schedule and some students can come and find us, in 99, 2000, what he and Sherry and Kurt, and Pat and you and I have grown from those early days in the early 2000s is very impactful. It's very amazing. Yeah.
It's still incredible too that we have folks like the both of you who came here in the early 2000s, was impacted by Dennis, connected with Dennis, and here you are still today, 2024, as we're recording this podcast,
right.
Still doing the incredible work of teaching classes, still proposing new classes, new content, new pedagogies to still advance disability studies and critical DS on this campus.
Right.
So I just want to say, I didn't know Dennis personally, but I know he'd both be so proud of you two, as well as where the program has come today, because it is incredible to see how it has blossomed over the past 24 years and still a new program compared to a lot. I mean, the University of Washington was created in 1861. Some of these programs have been standing since the beginning of time, it feels like. But to have something that is truly our baby and was Dennis's baby, still get to see it grow up. It's really sweet. Joanne, Sara, thank you both so much for joining us today and talking about Dennis. Before we end this podcast, are there any shout outs that you want to give to the Disability Studies program or the different awards and scholarships that we have, the different classes, how folks could possibly get involved? This is your time to plug anything that you want to.
This is Joanne. Yeah, let's plug summer classes. We are developing more and more of a summer curriculum. If that's something that works for undergrads or grad students, come and find us. It's giving us an opportunity to do more hybrid and distance learning teaching because summer school likes that sort of thing and students like that sort of thing. I didn't talk about this, but the ways that hybrid teaching has taught me about accessibility this has really been, these 4 years have been really, really transformational for me as an instructor, learning from students what the knowledge that they have and the needs that they have about how to teach hybrid, because folks are learning in all sorts of environments. And that's great. Let's keep doing that. Definitely come over, find our summer classes, which have some hybrid and distance learning options. We've got Jason Naranjo. I want to give a shout out to him that he's been collaborating with a group called Outdoors for All to create opportunities for service learning for students interested in disability studies. So yeah, keep finding our classes.
And I would just say too, the Dennis Lang Award is supported through donations, right? I mean, a lot of us and other people contributed when we started it, and many of us keep contributing. And if you value the stuff that Dennis did, and everybody should value that, you can chip in. And that's the way that we keep it going and keep recognizing the student scholar activists on campus.
Right.
Sara, it's almost like you knew that the donation link for the Dennis Lang Award can be found below this podcast in the resource section as well too. Again, in the resources, there will be some additional information too, such as some stories of Dennis, as well as what the Dennis Lang Award is and why we choose to remember him as such. But please consider donating if you're a disabled student yourself as well too. read about the scholarship as well too, see if it might be applicable to you, especially if you're one who is trying to bridge both scholarship as well as activism in the field of disability and disability studies. But again, I just want to give a big thank you to Joanne and Sara for one, being here today, and two, all the work they've done to continue Dennis's legacy long after his passing, and continuing to be staunch advocates for the disability studies program and disabled students on campus today. So thank you both very much.
Thank you. And thanks for doing the podcast. I think it's a great way to keep Dennis's legacy alive and spread the word.